spent most of my career in kind of technical roles at technology companies, but really supporting creatives, and that's really what I do now for Dell. And so the thought was this session we talk a little bit about how computing and how technology could enhance and enable creativity. And actually, the hope is we have a few examples to share that may help everyone on here realize that technology can be your friend, and it can be a gateway to additional discovery. And of course, helping is somebody who's much more creative than I am. I'm kind of the technology person, but we have Stephen Burns with us. Hey, Stephen, you want to give yourself a little introduction?
Sure. Hey, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Creative Conference, and thank you, Maxim. It's an honor to be here with Matt and everyone else. I'm a digital artist, so my background basically is I teach. I taught at UCSD. I taught at Palomar College. I taught at Irvine College. I'm currently teaching at Santa Monica College as well as Golden West College. I'm an author. Maybe later on I'll share a little bit of the books that I've written. I've written about 8 or 9 books so far, and basically digital artistry. And we'll talk more about that. But yeah, I'm just as you were talking, Matt. I'm thinking, you know what? My very first computer was a K Pro 2.
Oh my, yeah, okay.
So technology. And then my second computer was a laptop. It was an IBM ThinkPad, black and white screen.
Yeah, I mean, same thing. My first computer was actually had a single LCD text line readout. It was all text programming, and it just tiny single line. It gave you a paper tape when you programmed as well. So, so yeah, things have changed a lot, and I think that's what's, to me, what's most interesting about technology and creativity is that there really has been a digital revolution in how traditional arts operate now. And I know you specifically, I think you told me you started in photography,
right?
And to me, it was the essence of original photography, chemicals and light, and very physical things. And you were early on Photoshop, if I recall.
Well, I was basically I started drawing and painting, and I bought I was with my girlfriend and I. We took a life drawing class, and we're working with oils and pastels. And I bought a camera, which is the company is no longer in business. It's Minolta. Yep. I bought the old Minolta X700. Didn't know how to use it. It was a pro camera. So I decided to take a class over at Palomar College here in San Diego. I'm in San Diego. I'm in a place where the weather everywhere else sucks. So
okay, I'm in New Hampshire. It doesn't suck.
No,
at least for the three days of summer here. Yeah.
So I took a class in an introduction to color, just taking using the camera, and I was hooked. And I decided I wanted to go professional. And so yeah, I started back in the days way before digital. In fact, I started actually my first teaching jobs was teaching advanced darkroom techniques. So I was working with people with the 4x5 film and the big bellows camera. That was our technology then. Even to this day, some photographers fight this idea of going to digital from film. Even some film people, film directors, movie directors. Now we got Larissa is here. Larissa, and she's even in their field. Some people still want to use film. They want the feeling of film.
Right.
To me, that's the past. You have to, the way I'm looking at it is where I was in photography, that was considered the technology. Now that technology has changed, I'm gonna tell you a little bit of a story, and it's a true story.
Awesome.
I run the Photoshop users group here in San Diego. We're an Adobe sanctioned user group. We're the largest in the country. We're about 5,000 members. The guys in Seattle says, the Photoshop user group in Seattle says they're the largest, but actually we're the largest. Just so, so, so I went into a photography studio. They were still using film, and they just happened to be right next door to a photographic accessories outlet. And I went over next door to the studio, and they had this beautiful, frame portraits of their clients. And I looked at them, and I talked to the young lady who was, I guess she was the office manager, the store manager. The owner wasn't there at the time. And I made a comment. I said, "Oh, you've progressed to digital." She goes, "No, we don't do digital here, sir. We do real photography." So I looked at her and I said, "Well, eventually you're going to be going to digital." She goes, "Excuse me, sir, you're wasting my time. Show yourself out to the door." So, so I got kicked out of the studio for mentioning the digital word, right? Well, I came back a month later, they're gone, right? So it's interesting how this new technology has been changing in leaps and bounds very quickly, because for the first time in history, we as human beings can now use every creative mediums that we know in this little box called the computer.
Right.
Filmmaking, writing novels, poetry, photography, drawing, painting, sculpting. Every creative medium that we as human beings understand and know can now be done in the box called the computer. And this is inspiring a whole new breed of artists.
Yeah.
So
I would even go a step further to say it includes architecture and the actual physical creation of things with 3D printing and computer controlled cutting. Actually, I actually was just talking yesterday with a customer of ours who's, he built a pandemic business of plasma cutting sheet metal. And he's done all sorts of artistic things in the form of like bespoke fire pits. But the business he fell into, which I think is just amazing, is customized skid plates for Toyota Tundra trucks. So apparently, but he basically does them on order. And again, he could not have done this without the technology there. And every piece is unique because he's doing it based on whatever the buyer wants. They're kind of customizing their truck, if you will. And so I actually think that this idea of creativity goes all the way through to the actual creation of physical things as well. That's kind of what we're seeing on that side of the business.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I know I've gotten into 3D printing. I've got 8 3D printers and a couple of resin printers.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, you're so very right. It's an exciting time to be an artist right now.
So that's a funny crossover. One of the other speakers at Creativity Conference, I think he's already spoken, but you'll be able to see his stuff in replay, is Mark Mann. Okay. Mark is a really amazing portrait photographer. And again, one of the reasons he's worked with Dell is because of the performance of technology. So you can imagine that in his environment, he's trying to drive sessions where he can interact with his client and get the best kind of portraits. And so when he works tethered, on previous machines, he had a real trouble with that in terms of having the performance to work tethered with the precision stuff he's working at, the workstations that we've given to him. Things are very fast. He can work interactively and focus on the client, not on the machine, which is a lot of what we think about when we think about technology at Dell, is kind of making the machine disappear. Like the creators should just be able to do their creation and the machine should support them, but be in the background. It's like the paintbrush you prefer. It's like the camera you prefer. And so anyway, Mark's been working on precision because it provides that kind of performance and speed. But the thing he told me recently is he's been 3D printing additional parts and components for his photography business, additional elements for his camera, things like just making carriers for SD cards, I mean, this kind of crossover is not that unusual. I find it really, really cool, in fact, to see how people are moving in that direction, combining, going from, still digital imaging was a big deal, as you said, like the passion about film-based photography. And I'm really clear, because I've been here long enough to see that, is the original digital photography was not so great. The images were not so great. But now with like things like being able to shoot high dynamic range on your camera, it gives you something that's closer to the physical attributes of film, at least the light capture capabilities of film. And again, the digital technology to manipulate that. And one of the things we pay attention to at Dell is the ability to see that on a display, because I think a lot of folks may realize that the monitor choice is one of those really critical things, to have enough of the color gamut, enough of the dynamic range to actually see what you photographed. And so we pay a lot of attention to those kinds of things. And we always encourage people who are in this kind of work to think about that as part of their tool. You don't want to be working in the dark, essentially, or not being able to really fully see your work. I think that old term of what you see is what you get really applies here. Is today's digital cameras can capture a really wide gamut, and it's great to have a monitor that can show that.
Oh, it's wonderful. I'm using, the camera I'm using is Canon, and and it's a full frame sensor camera.
Yep.
For those of you who are not familiar, who may not be familiar with sensor sizes, with the full frame sensor, it's about the exact same size as 35 millimeter frame on film. Most cameras out today have a smaller sensor size. So the beautiful thing about the technology with sensor sizing is that the larger the sensor, the more dynamic range, the more detail that particular instrument is going to be able to capture, which is, I think, is amazing. I mean, I've been playing around with medium format digital cameras.
Oh, cool.
Which are absolutely fabulous. The sensor size is like this big. So your sensor on your cell phone, right? So everybody, because I get this a lot, especially sometimes from students, and I have to prove them wrong by having them shoot both a cell phone camera and a full frame sensor camera, and everybody's convinced that the cameras on cell phones are little trusty little device that distracts us in day-to-day business, right? It's just as good as a real camera. And they're better. I mean, it's amazing the quality that you get from these things, but it's not like using a larger sensor. So as a digital artist, I do like to use photography in my work. And later on today, in my next presentation, I'm going to be showing some of my workflows and challenges that I give myself to create something that's more unique. But anyways, I like to use photography in my work because it helps me to think. It helps me to produce ideas and designs and shapes that maybe I would have never thought about before, right? So working with a blank canvas, relies mostly on your own imagination, where I like to rely on things that's going to inspire me to create another direction. I like looking at other people's work, other paintings, and so forth. So do you want to talk about some of the hardware that Dell produces that you think will be ideal for artists today?
I try to stay away from, for this conference, we try to stay away from all that level of detail. What I'll say is that, so I work in Dell's workstation group, and workstations are about providing performance to actually manage these ever larger files, and whether that's 2D files like photography or video, or whether that's 3D content with lots of geometry, our systems are really built for that, and they're tested on the software that most people use every day, whether that's Photoshop, Lightroom, Premiere, Media Composer, Blender, and so forth. We build the platform so it can kind of disappear and let creators just create. And then, of course, what we call front of screen experience, the quality of the monitor, we can really tune for the right kind of work. And so generally, that's our ultra sharp monitors. That's about as much as I want to say in terms of that piece. Just know that, the technology underneath those machines becomes really important. So I know, as a Photoshop user, a lot of people may not realize that the graphics processing unit, the GPU, the graphics
Right.
card, is
Right.
critically important to most every Creative Cloud application. Photoshop,
Okay.
Illustrator, InDesign, Premiere, After Effects. You probably know that there's a setting inside the settings area that says use my graphics processor. What you probably don't know is like most everything you do in Lightroom routes through that processor. The faster the processor, the faster you're actually going to be able to do things like scaling an image, color treating an image, and so forth. So it really does make a big difference. The other thing that you may not know is that graphics processor, GPU, has a amount of video memory, often called VRAM.
Right.
VRAM lets you do something like, it lets you do bigger projects because they all can load into VRAM. It also lets you have more than one application open at once and to be able to flip between them more seamlessly, because each application kind of eats a share of that VRAM. If you got a lot of VRAM, you can actually have more applications running simultaneously and it runs smoother. So these are some of the things we like people to realize when they start thinking about, hey, I have a bunch of applications at the same time, open at the same time, but it doesn't work so great, or I simply can't do it. And you can alleviate some of that by picking, the right kind of hardware system if you want to do that a lot.
Right. So Matt, let's do this.
Yeah.
Let's walk through this process for someone who's want to sit down, they want to be a digital artist. Where do they need to begin? And I think you just hit it right on the head a little bit. It's going to be your calibration device. Now you have a calibration device. Does Dell have one?
So this is for the monitor itself. That's an interesting question.
Okay, great. Let's
Yeah.
start there and talk about that. And could you share your screen and show the actual device that you guys represent?
Yeah, so in fact, we don't make those devices ourselves. We actually work with a variety of providers. So I think what Stephen's addressing here is, if you want to have color accuracy, there's two things you want to look for, especially if you're doing visual kinds of work. One is you want to have a monitor that covers a wider gamut of colors, and one of the best measures of that is looking at the color space. And so this is a little bit technical, but important. So there's probably 3 or 4 color spaces you probably want to pay attention to, depending on what kind of work you're doing. So first one, Srgb is a great example. Cool. Thanks, Stephen. So Srgb is a color space commonly used for still graphics and web graphics. So if you're doing that kind of work, you want to be able to see your monitor should cover a wide chunk, 90% or more of Srgb. If you're doing photography, there's a color space called Adobe RGB, and you want to be, up high up the percentage of Adobe RGB coverage. If you're doing video work, the color spaces there are more like DCI-P3 or Rec 2020. Those color spaces are more video specific, and so you want to look for high percentage coverage in those. A good monitor can actually cover multiple at high level at once. But again, knowing what kind of work you're going to do. If you're photography, lean toward that Adobe RGB coverage. If you do a lot of HDR photography, look for higher dynamic range. So I'll show you a couple of monitors that we make, just so you can get an idea. Because there's one interesting display that is designed for both high dynamic range, and it has an integrated colorimeter in it, which is a color measurement device. So I'll just show you this briefly. I'm going to take the screen over for
All
you.
right, cool. Actually, I'll take me off. And do I need to stop sharing or?
Yep, you should stop.
All right, let's see. How do I do that? We're on a second. Get me find my device here. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, I'm trying to find. Oh, I guess it's hidden.
You should go to your Zoom.
Go to my Zoom. I'm looking for it here. Give me. Okay, there
There
we
you
go.
go. We got a little help from John, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, John.
It,
Okay,
it,
so
it hides. Zoom hides itself when I'm sharing.
you can probably see this. This is the display. This is our UP3221. It's a 4K display, so 4K resolution, so great for people doing 4K video. It actually ships with a hood. So again, this controls the viewing environment because ambient colors can actually affect your perception of color, ambient light. And you'll notice this little thing sticking up, that's a little color measurement device. So the first thing I said is look for a display that covers the color space that you're going to work in. And the second is you should calibrate that. And calibration can be done with your eyeball. Your eyeball is actually a pretty good measurement device. And there's actually routines built into our displays, software that you can use called Premiere Color software that lets you do a kind of visual calibration using your eye. But measured calibrations can be more accurate. And so this is a little stick that kind of pops up during a calibration session will actually calibrate the monitor to known standards. And so this is a great way to keep your monitor in that what you see is what you get environment. And so it's a useful tool if you're trying to be in a place of predictable color and know exactly what you're doing. So you can see all the colors and you know that they're calibrated on the display itself.
Maybe you can make a quick mention as to what those known standards are.
Yeah. So like I said, the Adobe RGB, sRGB, P3 are all known color spaces. So that's a pretty fun one. I'll show you one other display I really like now. It's one of I just got one on my porch this afternoon, funny enough, is this one. So the other thing is about, having space. This is an enormous monitor, but it covers almost all of the video space. It's actually about 5K pixels. So quite significant. It's 40 inches, which is kind of enormous. But it covers 98% of the P3 video color space. For video editors, one of the things that this kind of thing gives to you is you can have a really long space for your timeline. So if you're working in Resolve, having a big long space to actually put your timeline and all your control panels is really great. So a lot of people love this for audio workflows, for video workflows, where you've got this kind of timeline concept or dope sheet content concept in the user interface. So just a couple of things there on paying attention to monitors. Now, Stephen, you had something on screen there. I think we want to go back to, because the other thing that you're doing, you mentioned 3D printing, but to do 3D printing, you got to have a 3D model. And so you also have gotten into 3D, which is kind of an interesting art, going from traditional analog photography to digital photography and video, and now 3D. So,
absolutely. Well, okay. So, I guess, before I start talking about 3D, I think the transition that most people are going to go to is going to be Photoshop, right?
Right, sure.
It's going to be a 2D program. There's a number of programs out there. I'm going to show, let me go to my Behance page here. So I'm an Adobe educational leader, so I work closely with them, and what I love to do is to share what can be done with both this 2-dimensional world blended with a 3-dimensional world.
Yeah.
So I'm going to share a little bit of how I'm using both to create a little bit, and then we can talk more about 3D, because 3D is huge right now. It didn't used to be,
right?
But now it's because the cost of those printers have come down just drastically.
Yeah, and the software. I mean, I think that's sort of all of it's kind of become more and more accessible.
There we go. So when I was actually working with Adobe on their Twitch channel, when they had one, I wanted to bring to life what can be done with a combination of 3-dimensional and 2-dimensional worlds, being pulling them both together. Let's see if I can even make it a little smaller so it's easier to see.
Wow, very cool.
Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm using the Photoshop program to create a landscape of sorts, and then using digital painting and using a three-dimensional object, which in this case is the hand, and then the fire and the smoke and the steam is all digitally painted in,
Yep.
using layers as we know it. So so this world of technology goes far beyond the mechanical, technical aspects of it, where the computer, the processor, the video cards, they're absolutely critical for your pleasurable experience in working as a three-dimensional artist. We need to have some powerful video cards. Video card is very important,
Yep.
because that's going to be the thing that's going to redraw everything for you in real time as you're working. Your processor is critical. I am a Dell guy. Okay, so I work with Alienware. It's
Yep.
my
And that's
dream
another
machine.
Dell brand.
I'm only now able to afford Alienwares. so Alienwares is a gaming machine, which basically means that you're going to have a very powerful graphics card. So here's another example. It's a combination of two-dimensional as well as three-dimensional. So the buildings don't really exist. So I'm basically using digital painting to create the buildings, and I'm using some photo compositing as well as digital painting to create the backgrounds and the landscape. Landscape is nothing here is a single image or single texture. They're all just being, placed in there and strategically placed in there to create my scene. Then you've got the ships, which is actually I created in a 3D program called Lightwave, and I'll talk more about 3D in just a little bit. But I just wanted to share with you, some of the creative possibilities of what can be done with all of these tools. So here's another example where I'm using the power of a two-dimensional program, in this case of Photoshop, blended with my three-dimensional program. And I think I used the 3D program I used was called Poser, and then I textured it in another program called Lightwave, which is another 3D program. Now, the 3D program that I am championing now is Blender. So how many people know what Blender is? Raise your hands.
Yep.
None. All right. Well, I didn't say none. I can't see everybody at one time here, and some people got the videos turned off. So okay. Here, another example. So I like to use this technology to go beyond the obvious. What I like to take it way beyond. I like to take it to the furthest depth of my imaginations. Create things that don't really exist. And all of this is all mostly digitally painted in, photo compositing, some 3D. Here is another 3D one where most of the background is created in Photoshop and laced in with digital painting and photography, and then the human characters are 3D objects, and I have to integrate them into the scene as if they're where they've been photographed with a single camera. So I have to pay attention to things like perspective, all those traditional rules of art that we know that we've learned as art has to apply. Right? Just because we have this new technology, called, the computer or the laptop, does not mean the rules of art are thrown out the window.
Right.
All of that applies because
Yeah, I was going to say it's one of the things that I'm just noticing on the chat is people asking about Blender, and I think you missed probably one of the most important things is that Blender is open source and free.
That's right. Oh yes.
And so you and I, Stephen, know that 3D software used to be tens of thousands of dollars, and it wasn't within reach of everybody. It wasn't easy to access, and so I think to me this is one of the things that you see with technology is it tends to start out in a very expensive, out of reach kind of way. And over time, it becomes more and more accessible. And, I saw this with things like high definition and 4K video, like that was out of reach,
Oh,
stratospheric.
yeah.
Just video editing,
Oh, yes.
where I started in video editing, now more than 20 years ago, it was $250,000 to edit video on tape, and quickly has moved to, free applications that run on your PC, and you can actually edit on your phone now. So, this is the thing that I think is really interesting, is that technology becomes more and more democratized, and the tools become more and more in reach. And I think Blender is a great example of, it's an incredibly powerful 3D tool.
And they just released a new version, because mine is 2.931. Now this is 2. It must have come out this week.
Yep. Yeah. So they're always updating, and I think pretty amazing. And it's one that Adobe supports. Adobe's got a real interest in 3D, and so they recently announced their support
Yes.
from a financial standpoint,
Yes.
and doing some plugins within the Blender environment from the Adobe Substance team. So some really amazing things going on here. And I'll say, from a hardware standpoint, in order to do what Stephen's showing, you have to get, the goal is, getting, in some cases, not always, is getting these kind of hyper realistic or photorealistic rendering to combine with 2D images and photography. Historically, the way you do that is through a technique called ray tracing. And ray tracing is always expensive to process, difficult, could take hours or days for a single image. And one of the things that's been happening in the last 2 years is the introduction of NVIDIA's new GPU technology called RTX. And the RT part actually stands for ray tracing. They provide hardware acceleration for ray tracing. And so that gives you a real-time or near real-time ray tracing. And this idea of getting photorealism is something that you can do more interactively. You don't have to sit and wait for the computer to chew through it. And since they introduced this almost, I think, exactly 2 years ago, they've all the major software players, including Blender, support their hardware acceleration, and it makes it a much more exciting environment. It enables, enables creativity to happen in a more quick way and in a more natural way, because you can see a final result much more quickly. So we're really excited about that kind of technology introduction, and it's something that we include in our workstations, of course.
And for those of you who didn't get the link, it's blender.org. It's now just a little comment with Blender. Not only is it open source, but it's really damn good. It behaves like Maya. In fact, many of the professional Maya modelers and designers are actually jumping over to Blender now.
Yep.
It's that good.
Yeah, it's a great application. Really amazing. So the other thing I'll mention that I think, and we've got a few more minutes, Stephen, before I believe we're going to give away a Precision workstation in this session. So you should hang around. I believe one of our MCs is going to come back and join us. But one of the other areas that I think is really interesting is the application of artificial intelligence and machine learning in creativity. And this is something that, I keep bringing up Adobe, but Adobe has a whole area called Sensei. It's kind of a grouping of features across multiple applications where they use the power of the computer to do multiple iterations, or to do kind of repetitive and boring kind of work. And so you may have seen their infill tool, which actually uses a machine learning algorithm behind the scenes to remove objects from a frame. And they can do that with video, and it's amazing, pretty amazing results. Those are the kinds of functions that used to be very, very repetitive and kind of boring and difficult to do. And those are the things that are perfect to hand over to the computer. I think on the 3D side, we're seeing, and people that design things, I see some things that Stephen's designed there. There's an area of using AI to do generative design, to actually help you come up with physical designs. And again, the computer's great at running through thousands of iterations, allowing the artist to kind of, determine what's the best. And particularly in engineering of physical things where you have to have strength or flexibility characteristics, the computer is very good at running those complex calculations behind the scenes while doing those iterations. So we're seeing this as a really interesting tool. And the reason I mentioned all this is there's also acceleration in hardware for AI and machine learning, particularly in the RTX, the NVIDIA RTX cards. And so, for folks that are beginning to use those functions in Premiere and After Effects that are AI based, some of those actually run faster on those on the right hardware. So again, the technology makes a difference in that. So I see some of your cool 3D work here, Stephen. What you showing?
Yeah, so this is some earlier stuff. Again, just the same concept of integrating the three-dimensional with the two-dimensional world. This one I did for Adobe's first 3D book, and it was several authors. In fact, I'll go to my book section. As I promised I would share that with you. I wrote, this is by Focal Press, 3D Photoshop for the creative professional. And this is 3D work all done in Photoshop. So in case anyone didn't know, yes, Photoshop does 3D, and most people have no idea. So I wrote a book, and these are in the book. These are all examples of each chapter where you learn step by step on how to create these images that you see. And all of this was modeled, lit, textured, and rendered in Photoshop.
It's amazing. Yeah.
And isn't that amazing? So the reason I wrote the book was because I'm a beta tester for Adobe, and I created a 3D scene, and the product manager says, what 3D modeling program did you create these in? I said, I created it in Photoshop. And I get this exclamation, back saying, you did this in Photoshop? I said, yes. And they said, well, send me the file. So they didn't believe me. So I sent them the file, the Photoshop layer files, and it shocked them. It said, you can do all this in Photoshop? Yeah, you guys wrote the program. So it's,
yeah, this is, 3D is one of those very useful capabilities. And, I know, again, we have a lot of, big commercial customers. One of the areas that 3D is beginning to be used increasingly for is retail product photography, whether that's visualizing automobiles before you buy them, or even devices in a Walmart catalog. Because the cycle for changing devices is so fast now, the design changes happen so quickly. Being able to render out a photorealistic image for a catalog or an online, page at Walmart or Amazon or wherever you're shopping, being able to do that dynamically from the 3D image is increasingly common. So it's a faster, more reactive way to provide imagery for those kinds of applications, and in many cases they're indistinguishable from photographs. So hey, Stephen, we're close to at time. So
okay.
One of the things I'd like to do is to see if there's any questions from our audience, or any examples that you guys have where you've seen technology make a difference in your creative work.
Love to see everybody else's work.
Yeah. And somebody has said, hey, come check our new exhibition of 3 animation. So thanks, Burial, Dean. I appreciate that.
Maybe we can unmute everybody's microphone so people can chat a little bit. So you can unmute your microphone yourselves, I believe. John is going to allow you guys to do that if you want to share.
Yeah, any comments, questions, we'd appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yeah. We this is a fun session for us to talk about. I think, particularly for me, I wouldn't say I don't have this kind of creative skill, but I love to see how the technology is used, and kind of interacting with folks at the creativity concerts and folks like Steven, of course, is one of the reasons I've been in this business so long.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely totally agree. I don't have like a huge wealth of 3D skills, but I've been working in film and video for over 20 years as a director and an editor and a writer and a producer, and just as an artist in general. And we live in Newark in, you know, in the ghetto, and that's kind of like on purpose, so that way we could affect change here. We're doing like a lot of like projections on like blight filled, you know, walls in the neighborhood, just to use like the science of the image to uplift people. And it's been really great to see like gang members like stop in the middle of the night and be like, this is incredible. And, you know, just uplift them to make their neighborhood beautiful.
Oh, that's fantastic. And you can get
It's
cheap labor,
fantastic.
too.
Yeah. That's amazing. Really cool. I think, you know, again, you know, technology of this sort and arts being used as a way to make change in the world is awesome. I think very cool example. Thanks for sharing.